What would you do if the person who brought you into this world spent 30 years telling you that your existence was her biggest regret? What if every birthday, every achievement, every moment of joy was overshadowed by the constant reminder that you were unwanted? My name is Elizabeth Parker, and this is the story of how I turned the deepest wound of my life into the most powerful gift I could ever give. It's about growing up in the shadow of resentment in the humid heat of Miami, finding my voice in the world of technology, and ultimately standing on a stage in front of millions to deliver a message that would change everything, not just for me, but for the woman who never believed I belonged in this world. Some gifts come wrapped in ribbons and bows. Others come wrapped in truth, growth, and the kind of quiet strength that can only be forged in the fires of rejection. This is the story of the latter, and why sometimes the most unforgettable gifts are the ones that force us to confront who we really are. But before we begin, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell us where you're listening from. The first time my mother told me I was a mistake, I was 7 years old. We were standing in our tiny kitchen in Little Havana, Miami, the tile floor warm beneath my bare feet, the humid air thick with the scent of Cafe Cubano from the Venanita next door. The late afternoon sun streamed through our cracked window, casting dancing shadows on the faded yellow walls. I had just shown her my report card, all A's, a smiley face sticker from Mrs. Rodriguez, and a note about how I was an exceptional student with remarkable potential. I remember the pride swelling in my chest as I held up that piece of paper, my 7-year-old heart beating fast with anticipation. Clara Parker, my mother, barely glanced at it. She was 27 then, still young, still beautiful in that tired way that single mothers often are. Her dark hair was pulled back in a messy bun, and her waitress uniform from the diner on Calle Ocho was stained with coffee and remnants of the lunch rush. But it wasn't the exhaustion in her face that I remember most vividly. It was the coldness in her brown eyes as she looked down at me. "You know what, Elizabeth?" she said, setting down her cigarette on the edge of the counter. Her voice was calm, matter-of-fact, as if she were commenting on the weather. "You were a mistake. The biggest mistake I ever made. You're the reason my life fell apart." The words hit me like a physical blow. I felt my stomach drop, the report card suddenly heavy in my small hands. The pride I had felt moments before evaporated, replaced by a crushing weight that seemed to settle permanently in my chest. "But Mom," I whispered, my voice barely audible, "I got all A's." She picked up her cigarette again, took a long drag, and exhaled the smoke toward the ceiling. "Doesn't matter how smart you are, baby girl. Doesn't change what you are." That night, I lay in my bed, a mattress on the floor in the corner of our living room, staring at the ceiling fan that barely stirred the thick Miami air. The sound of traffic from US 1 filtered through our thin walls, mixing with the distant music from the bars on 8th Street. I could hear my mother moving around the apartment, the clink of bottles, the low murmur of the television. I didn't cry that night. Something inside me had shifted, hardened. Instead, I made a promise to myself in the darkness of that sweltering room. I would prove her wrong. Not to her. I already sensed that nothing I did would ever be enough for Clara Parker, but to myself. I would become someone so undeniably valuable, so brilliantly successful, that no one could ever call me a mistake again. What I couldn't have known then was that this promise would shape every decision I made for the next 23 years. Growing up in Miami as Clara Parker's daughter meant learning to navigate two worlds simultaneously. There was the public world, where I was the quiet, brilliant girl who tutored other kids in math, who never missed a day of school, who wore the same 3 shirts in rotation but always kept them clean and pressed. And there was the private world, where I absorbed my mother's resentment like a sponge, where every achievement was met with indifference, where every birthday was a reminder of the day her real life ended. Our apartment was on 6th Street, sandwiched between a Haitian beauty salon and a Cuban grocery store. The building was old, with thin walls and thinner bank accounts. Most of our neighbors were immigrants like my mother. She had come from Ohio after my father left, drawn by Miami's promise of cheap rent and cash-paying jobs. What she found instead was a city that could be just as unforgiving as the small town she'd fled. I learned Spanish from Mrs. Gonzalez next door, who fed me arroz con pollo when Clara worked double shifts. I learned responsibility from carrying groceries up 3 flights of stairs because the elevator was perpetually broken. And I learned resilience from watching my mother work herself to the bone, while somehow still finding the energy to remind me that I was the anchor dragging her down. "If it wasn't for you," she'd say, folding laundry on our kitchen table while I did homework, "I could have finished nursing school. I could have had a real career instead of serving coffee to truckers at 4 in the morning." The cruel irony was that my mother wasn't a bad person. She wasn't abusive in the traditional sense. She fed me, clothed me, made sure I got to school. She even seemed proud when teachers called to tell her about my academic achievements, until she hung up the phone and the mask slipped again. "Everyone thinks you're so special," she'd mutter, lighting another cigarette. If they only knew. By the time I reached high school, I had perfected the art of invisibility. I ate lunch alone in the library, stayed after school for every club that would have me, and found excuses to avoid going home until late evening. Miami Senior High School became my sanctuary, a place where my worth was measured in test scores and class rankings rather than the circumstances of my conception. It was in Mrs. Chen's advanced placement computer science class that I first discovered my true calling. While other students struggled with basic programming concepts, I found myself staying up until 3 in the morning, completely absorbed in the logic and beauty of code. There was something pure about programming. Every problem had a solution, every bug could be traced and fixed, every function performed exactly as intended. Unlike the chaos of my home life, the digital world made sense. "You have a gift, Elizabeth," Mrs. Chen told me one afternoon as I submitted yet another flawless assignment. "Have you thought about applying to MIT? Stanford? You're brilliant enough." I had thought about it, of course. I dreamed about it every night. But dreams required money, and money was something we'd never had. My mother's tips from the diner barely covered rent and groceries. College seemed as distant as the moon. "I don't know if we can afford it," I admitted, embarrassed. Mrs. Chen leaned forward, her eyes intense. "Elizabeth, talent like yours doesn't come around often. There are scholarships, grants, opportunities. You just have to be brave enough to reach for them." That night, I sat at our secondhand computer, a clunky desktop Mrs. Chen had helped me buy with my babysitting money, and began researching every scholarship, every grant, every opportunity one could find. The Miami heat made our apartment feel like an oven, but I barely noticed. For the first time in years, I felt something other than resignation. I felt hope. When I showed my mother the application materials spread across our kitchen table, she glanced at them with the same disinterest she'd shown my report cards for years. "Don't get your hopes up too high, baby girl," she said, not looking up from her crossword puzzle. "People like us don't get happy endings." But I was done accepting her limitations as my own. I worked on those applications with the same methodical precision I brought to my code. Every essay was rewritten until it sang. Every recommendation letter was carefully requested from teachers who believed in me. Every form was filled out with the meticulous attention of someone who understood that this was her one shot at escape. The acceptance letter from MIT arrived on a rainy Tuesday in March. I remember standing in our building's lobby, holding the thick envelope with trembling hands. The return address was enough to make my heart race, but I waited until I was back in our apartment to open it. "We are pleased to inform you that you have been accepted." I read the words 3 times before they sank in. Full scholarship, room and board covered, a chance to study at one of the most prestigious technology schools in the world. I found my mother in the kitchen, preparing for another evening shift at the diner. She was applying lipstick in the reflection of our toaster, the same coral shade she'd worn for as long as I could remember. "I got into MIT," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. She paused, lipstick halfway to her mouth, and looked at me in the toaster's reflection. For just a moment, I thought I saw something flicker across her face. Pride, maybe, or surprise. But then the mask settled back into place. "Well," she said, capping the lipstick and dropping it into her purse. "I guess that's something." She walked past me toward the door, pausing only to grab her keys from the counter. At the threshold, she turned back one last time. "Just remember, Elizabeth, no matter how far you go or what you achieve, you'll always be the mistake that started it all." The door closed behind her with a soft click, leaving me alone with my acceptance letter and the familiar weight of her words. But this time, something was different. This time, instead of that weight crushing me, I felt it transforming into something else entirely, fuel. I was 18 years old, and I was finally going to prove that some mistakes can change the world. MIT in September was a revelation. The crisp New England air was a sharp contrast to Miami's humid embrace, and the red brick buildings of Cambridge felt like stepping into a different universe entirely. For the first time in my life, I was surrounded by people who spoke my language, not Spanish or English, but the universal language of curiosity, innovation, and the relentless pursuit of solutions to impossible problems. My roommate was a brilliant girl named Sarah Chin from California, no relation to my high school computer science teacher, but with the same encouraging spirit. Sarah was studying aerospace engineering and had a way of making even the most complex problems seem conquerable. She was also the first person I'd ever met who didn't come with baggage, no expectations about who I should be, no knowledge of where I'd come from. "You're incredibly quiet," she observed during our first week as we sat in our small dorm room in McGregor House. The room was sparse but clean, with 2 beds, 2 desks, and a window that overlooked the Charles River. "Are you homesick?" I almost laughed at the question. Homesick for what? For the smell of cigarettes and resignation? For the constant reminder that I was unwanted? Instead, I shook my head. No, just adjusting. Sarah had this way of reading people that reminded me of Mrs. Chen. She nodded thoughtfully and didn't press further, but I could sense her watching me, trying to understand the walls I'd built around myself. Those first few months at MIT were like learning to breathe underwater. The academic workload was intense, far beyond anything I'd experienced in high school. But for the first time in my life, I was challenged in a way that felt exhilarating rather than overwhelming. In Professor Martinez's introduction to computer science and programming class, I found myself completely absorbed in problems that required not just memorization, but creative thinking and innovation. "Your approach to this algorithm is unconventional," Professor Martinez told me after class one October afternoon. "But it's elegant. Where did you learn to think like this?" I wasn't sure how to answer. How do you explain that years of surviving in an environment where traditional solutions don't work teaches you to find creative alternatives? "I guess I've always had to find different ways to solve problems," I said. He nodded, as if that explained everything. "I'd like you to consider joining my research group. We're working on artificial intelligence applications for social media algorithms, trying to understand how to make technology more human, more empathetic. I think your perspective could be valuable." Research. Real research, not just coursework or assignments. The opportunity felt too good to be true, but I accepted immediately. It was in Professor Martinez's lab that I first began developing what would eventually become my breakthrough invention. We were studying how social media algorithms could better identify and support users going through difficult personal situations, depression, family crisis, financial hardship. The more I worked on the project, the more I realized how technology could be used not just to connect people, but to actively improve their lives. The problem with most AI systems, I explained to Sarah one evening as we studied in the library, is that they're designed to maximize engagement, not to maximize well-being. What if we could create algorithms that actually recognized when someone needed help and connected them with resources? Sarah looked up from her fluid dynamics textbook. "That's incredibly ambitious, Liz. And incredibly important." Liz. It was the first time anyone had given me a nickname, and hearing it felt like putting on clothes that actually fit. Elizabeth was the girl my mother resented. Liz was someone I was creating from scratch. I called home every Sunday, partly out of obligation and partly out of some masochistic need to remind myself why I could never go back. The conversations follow the same pattern every week. "How are classes?" Clara would ask, and I could hear the television in the background, could picture her smoking on our fire escape. "Good. Really good. I'm doing research now, working on artificial intelligence." "That's nice, baby girl. Mrs. Gonzalez asks about you sometimes. Says you're probably too important to remember us little people now." The accusation stung, because it wasn't entirely wrong. I was changing, evolving into someone my 18-year-old self could never have imagined. But it wasn't about becoming too important, it was about becoming too strong to let her words define me anymore. "How are you doing, Mom? How's work?" "Same as always. Working my ass off to pay for this place while you live it up in Boston." She never asked about my grades, never showed interest in my research, never acknowledged that I was on a full scholarship and wasn't costing her a penny. The narrative she'd constructed, that I was the burden that ruined her life, was too central to her identity to abandon now. By junior year, my research had evolved into something groundbreaking. I was developing an AI system that could analyze social media behavior patterns to identify users who might be struggling with various life challenges, then connect them with appropriate resources and support networks. The technology could recognize the digital signatures of everything from postpartum depression to financial stress to domestic abuse. This could save lives, Professor Martinez told me as we reviewed my latest findings. You're not just creating code, Elizabeth. You're creating hope. The validation from someone whose opinion I respected meant more to me than I could express. But even as my professional life flourished, the emotional weight of my relationship with my mother continued to shape everything I did. Every achievement felt hollow when shared with someone who saw it as further evidence of my selfishness. Every success was tainted by the knowledge that the person who brought me into this world would never celebrate it. It was during the spring of my senior year that I met James Morrison, a graduate student in MIT's Sloan School of Management. James was working on his MBA while pursuing research in social entrepreneurship, how to build profitable businesses that created positive social impact. He was tall, with kind eyes and an easy laugh, and he had this way of making complex business concepts seem as logical as mathematical equations. You know, he said one evening as we studied together in the student center, your AI system isn't just brilliant research. It's a product that could change the world. Have you thought about what comes after graduation? I hadn't actually. I'd been so focused on proving myself academically that I hadn't considered the practical applications of my work beyond the university setting. What do you mean? I mean turning this into a company, a real business that can scale your impact beyond the lab. The idea was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. Starting a company meant risk, uncertainty, the possibility of failure. But it also meant the possibility of creating something that could help millions of people like the girl I'd been, who needed someone to recognize their pain and offer them hope. I wouldn't know where to start, I admitted. James smiled. That's what business partners are for. And just like that, my life took another unexpected turn. By graduation, James and I had drafted a business plan for what we called Empathy AI, a company dedicated to creating technology that made human connections more meaningful and support systems more effective. The night before graduation, I called my mother one last time from my dorm room. Most of my belongings were already packed, and Sarah had gone out to celebrate with friends. I sat on my narrow bed, looking out at the Charles River, trying to find the words to explain how much my life had changed. I graduate tomorrow, Mom. I know. I marked it on my calendar. There was a long pause. Part of me hoped she might surprise me, might express pride or affection or even basic interest in my accomplishments. But I'd learned not to expect emotional generosity from Clara Parker. I started a company, I said finally. James and I are going to try to help people using artificial intelligence. That's nice, baby girl. Just remember not to get too big for your britches. People don't like it when folks like us get ideas above our station. People like us. Even now, even after 4 years of academic excellence at one of the world's most prestigious universities, she couldn't see me as anything more than the mistake from Little Havana. But as I hung up the phone and looked around my dorm room one last time, I realized something had shifted. Her words still hurt, but they no longer defined me. I was no longer the 7-year-old girl standing in a cramped kitchen, desperate for approval. I was Elizabeth Parker, MIT graduate, co-founder of Empathy AI, an architect of my own future. The girl she called a mistake was about to change the world. And someday, though I couldn't know it yet, I would give her a gift that would force her to confront the truth about both of us. San Francisco in 2015 was a city drunk on its own potential. Every coffee shop buzzed with conversations about disruption and unicorns and changing the world. In Soma, where James and I rented a small office space barely larger than my old dorm room, you couldn't walk a block without overhearing someone pitching their revolutionary app or game-changing platform. But Empathy AI was different. While other startups focused on making people spend more time on their devices, we were building technology designed to help them live better lives offline. Our AI could analyze the subtle patterns in someone's social media activity, the timing of posts, the language they used, the photos they chose to share, and identify when they might be struggling with mental health issues, relationship problems, financial stress, or other life challenges. The technology was sophisticated, but the concept was simple. Instead of exploiting human vulnerability for profit, we wanted to help people find the support they needed. "It's ambitious," James said one evening as we worked late in our cramped office, surrounded by whiteboards covered in algorithms and business projections. "Maybe too ambitious." I looked up from my laptop, where I'd been refining the machine learning model that formed the core of our system. Outside our window, the San Francisco fog was rolling in from the bay, turning the city lights into soft halos. "You're having doubts." James leaned back in his chair, running his hands through his hair. "Not doubts about the technology. That's brilliant. But the business side. Liz, we're trying to convince investors to fund a company that actively tries to get people to spend less time on social media. That's not exactly a popular pitch in Silicon Valley." He was right, of course. Our first 6 months had been a constant cycle of pitch meetings with venture capitalists who couldn't understand why anyone would want to build technology that prioritized user well-being over engagement metrics. We've been rejected by 14 different firms, each with variations of the same feedback. Interesting concept, but where's the revenue model? But I'd spent my entire life being told I was a mistake, and I'd learned not to let other people's limited vision define my possibilities. "What if we're approaching this wrong?" I said, standing up and walking to the whiteboard. "What if instead of pitching this as social media technology, we pitch it as healthcare technology?" James raised an eyebrow. "Explain." I began sketching out a new framework on the board. "Think about it. Early intervention in mental health saves lives and saves money. What if we could identify someone showing signs of depression or anxiety weeks before they reach crisis point? What if we could connect new mothers with postpartum depression to support groups before they felt completely isolated? What if we could help people recognize the warning signs in their loved ones?" As I talked, I could see James's expression change from skepticism to excitement. This wasn't just about social media. This was about creating a new category of preventive healthcare. "Insurance companies would pay for this," he said slowly. "Healthcare systems would pay for this. Employee assistance programs would pay for this." "Exactly. And we're not trying to keep people scrolling through feeds. We're trying to get them the help they need to live healthier, happier lives." 3 weeks later, we had our first major investor meeting with Dr. Patricia Williams, a former surgeon who transitioned into healthcare venture capital. She was in her 50s, with silver hair and the kind of direct gaze that suggested she'd seen everything and wasn't easily impressed. "Walk me through a real-world scenario," she said after we presented our technology. I took a deep breath. "Let's say there's a single mother in Chicago. She's been posting less frequently on social media, and when she does post, her language patterns suggest increased stress and isolation. Our AI notices that she's searching for terms related to financial assistance late at night, and her activity patterns suggest she's not sleeping well. Instead of serving her ads for products she can't afford, our system connects her with local resources, food banks, childcare assistance, support groups for single parents." Dr. Williams leaned forward. "And this is all based on publicly available data. With user consent, yes. We're not violating privacy. We're using the information people are already sharing to help them connect with support systems they might not know exist." "Show me the data," she said. For the next hour, I walked her through our pilot program results. We'd partnered with a small social media platform to test our algorithms, and the results were remarkable. Users who received our intervention suggestions were 40% more likely to seek help for mental health issues, 60% more likely to connect with local support services, and reported significantly higher levels of life satisfaction in follow-up surveys. "This is impressive," Dr. Williams admitted. "But I have to ask, what's your personal stake in this? Most tech entrepreneurs are motivated by wealth or fame. You're building something that actively prioritizes human well-being over profit. Why?" The question caught me off guard. I'd become so practiced at discussing the technology and business model that I'd almost forgotten the emotional core of why this mattered to me. "Because I know what it feels like to struggle alone," I said finally. "I know what it's like to need help and not know where to find it. I know what it's like to feel invisible, worthless, like your pain doesn't matter to anyone. If we can use technology to make sure fewer people feel that way, then every challenge we face building this company is worth it. Dr. Williams studied me for a long moment. Then she smiled. I'm in. Let's change the world. That investment, $2.3 million in series of funding, transformed everything. Within 6 months, we'd moved to a proper office in Soma, hired our first employees, and begun partnering with major healthcare systems and insurance companies. Within a year, Empathy AI was processing data for over 5 million users and had successfully connected thousands of people with mental health resources, support groups, and crisis intervention services. But success in Silicon Valley came with its own pressures. As our user base grew, so did the expectations from investors, partners, and the media. I found myself giving interviews to tech publications, speaking at conferences, and being invited to panels about the future of AI and healthcare. You're becoming famous, James teased one evening after I'd returned from a particularly high-profile speaking engagement at a healthcare innovation summit. I'm becoming visible, I corrected. There's a difference. And there was. Fame implied a desire for attention. Visibility was about platform. The more prominent Empathy AI became, the more opportunities one had to advocate for technology that prioritized human well-being. Every interview was a chance to challenge the assumption that tech companies had to choose between profitability and social responsibility. During this period, my weekly calls with my mother took on a surreal quality. Here I was, building a company that was being featured in Wired and TechCrunch, speaking at conferences alongside some of the most influential people in technology, and she still seemed incapable of seeing me as anything other than the burden who derailed her life. I saw you on the news last week, she said during one of our Sunday conversations. It was the most acknowledgement of my success she'd ever offered. Really? What did you think? You look tired. And too skinny. You need to take better care of yourself. Even when she tried to express concern, it came wrapped in criticism. I'd learned to appreciate these moments as the closest thing to affection I was likely to receive from Clara Parker. Business is going well, I offered. We're helping a lot of people. That's nice, baby girl. Just don't let all that success go to your head. Pride comes before a fall, you know. By 2018, Empathy AI had grown into a company of over 200 employees and was valued at $500 million. We'd processed data from more than 50 million users and had quantifiable evidence that our interventions were saving lives. The CDC had cited our research in their reports on suicide prevention, and we'd been invited to present our findings to congressional committees examining mental health policy. But the more successful I became professionally, the more acutely I felt the absence of family celebration. I'd achieved everything I dreamed of as that 18-year-old girl leaving Miami, but there was still a 7-year-old inside me who just wanted her mother to be proud. It was James who first suggested that I was carrying around more emotional baggage than I realized. You know, he said one evening as we walked along the Embarcadero after a particularly successful board meeting. For someone who's built a company dedicated to helping people process their emotional challenges, you're remarkably resistant to examining your own. What do you mean? I mean you've created technology that helps millions of people connect with support systems, but you still call your mother every Sunday to have the same painful conversation that leaves you drained for the rest of the week. He wasn't wrong, but understanding your patterns and changing them are two different things entirely. She's my mother, James. She's the only family I have. Family isn't about blood, Liz. Family is about people who support you, who celebrate your successes, who want the best for you. By that definition, you have a huge family, everyone who works at Empathy AI, everyone whose life we've improved, everyone who believes in what we're building together. As we stood there looking out at the Bay Bridge, its lights reflecting on the dark water, I realized he was right. I'd spent so much energy trying to earn love from someone who seemed incapable of giving it that I'd almost missed the genuine affection and support that surrounded me. But I also realized something else. My mother's rejection wasn't just about me anymore. It was about her, and the choices she'd made, and the life she'd convinced herself she couldn't have. Maybe it was time to stop trying to earn her approval and start offering her something else entirely. Maybe it was time to show her that the mistake she'd resented for 30 years had grown into someone capable of extraordinary generosity. The idea that would eventually become my gift to Clara Parker began forming that night on the Embarcadero. But it would take 2 more years and one final conversation before I fully understood what that gift needed to be. By my 30th birthday in March 2020, Empathy AI had become more than a company, it had become a movement. Our technology was being used by healthcare systems across 43 states, and our research on AI-assisted mental health intervention had been published in the New England Journal of Medicine. What had started as a small startup in a cramped San Francisco office was now a billion-dollar company that employed over 800 people and had directly helped more than 2 million individuals connect with mental health resources and support systems. But perhaps more importantly, we'd proven that technology companies didn't have to choose between profitability and social responsibility. Empathy AI had shown that you could build a sustainable, growing business while actively making the world a better place. The irony wasn't lost on me that I'd spent my entire life feeling like a mistake, only to build a company dedicated to helping other people realize their worth. As my birthday approached, James and I had been discussing the possibility of taking the company public. The IPO would not only validate everything we'd built, but it would also provide the capital to expand our platform globally and develop new technologies for addressing social isolation, domestic abuse, and other challenges that traditional healthcare systems struggle to identify and address. You realize what this means, don't you? James said as we sat in my office overlooking the San Francisco Bay. The late afternoon sun was streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows, and I could see the Golden Gate Bridge in the distance, its towers emerging from the fog like something out of a dream. What does it mean? It means you're about to become one of the youngest female billionaires in tech history. It means every major publication in the world is going to want to interview you. It means you're going to have a platform to influence policy and culture in ways that most people can only dream of. The weight of that responsibility was both thrilling and terrifying. I'd grown comfortable being the CEO of a successful company, but the idea of becoming a public figure on that scale felt overwhelming. Are you ready for that level of attention? James asked. Before I could answer, my assistant knocked on the door. Elizabeth, your mother is on line 1. It was a Wednesday afternoon, nowhere near our usual Sunday call time. My first thought was that something was wrong, a medical emergency, an accident, something that would require me to fly back to Miami immediately. Mom, is everything okay? Elizabeth, baby girl. Her voice sounded different, shaky and certain. I need to tell you something. My heart rate spiked. What's wrong? Are you hurt? No, nothing like that. I saw the article in the Miami Herald. About your company. About what you've accomplished. I'd forgotten that our recent funding announcement had been picked up by local news outlets across the country, including my hometown paper. Oh, right. That. Elizabeth. Her voice was quiet now, almost vulnerable. I had no idea. I mean, I knew you were doing well, but I didn't understand. I didn't realize what you'd built. What you'd become. There was a long pause. I could hear her breathing on the other end of the line, could picture her sitting in our old kitchen, probably smoking a cigarette, trying to find the words for something she'd never learned how to say. I read about how your company helps people, how you've saved lives, how you've given people hope when they didn't have anywhere else to turn. Another pause, longer this time. I realized that you turned into exactly the kind of person I needed when I was young and scared and pregnant and had no idea what I was doing. You became the person who could have helped me see that having you wasn't a mistake, it was the best thing that ever happened to me. I felt tears starting to form in my eyes. In 30 years, my mother had never said anything like this to me. Mom, let me finish, baby girl. Please. I need to say this. Her voice was stronger now, more determined. I was 19 when I got pregnant with you. Your father was gone before I even knew you existed. I was alone and terrified and angry at the whole world. And instead of dealing with my anger at him, at the situation, at my own choices, I took it out on you. I spent 30 years blaming you for problems that had nothing to do with you. She was crying now. I could hear it in her voice. You were never a mistake, Elizabeth. You were the best thing that ever happened to me, and I was too broken to see it. I was too scared to love you the way you deserved, because I was afraid that if I let myself love you completely, and then lost you somehow, it would destroy me. So instead, I destroyed you a little bit every day for 30 years. The words I'd waited my entire life to hear were finally being spoken, but instead of joy, I felt a complex mixture of relief, sadness, and something that might have been forgiveness beginning to take root. "I don't expect you to forgive me," she continued. "I don't even know if I deserve it. But I needed you to know that everything you've accomplished, everything you've become, it's not despite being my daughter. It's because you have a strength and a compassion that I never had. You turn the pain I caused you into something beautiful, something that helps other people. That's not just success, baby girl. That's grace." I sat in my office, surrounded by the evidence of everything I'd built, everything I'd achieved, and realized that this conversation was worth more than all of it combined. "Mom," I said softly, "I forgive you. I forgave you a long time ago. I just didn't know how to tell you." We talked for another hour that day. Really talked, maybe for the first time in our lives. She told me about her childhood, about the poverty and instability that had shaped her fear of vulnerability. I told her about MIT, about the early days of Empathy AI, about James and the family I'd built for myself in San Francisco. When we finally hung up, I sat alone in my office as the sun set over the bay, feeling like I had just been handed the missing piece of a puzzle I'd been trying to solve my entire life. But I also realized something else. Forgiveness was just the beginning. After 30 years of carrying the weight of her resentment, my mother was going to need more than words to truly heal. She was going to need to see tangible evidence that her mistakes could be transformed into something meaningful. And I was finally in a position to give her that evidence. The idea came to me 3 months later, during what should have been one of the most triumphant moments of my career. Empathy AI was going public, and I'd been invited to ring the opening bell at the New York Stock Exchange. As I stood on the trading floor, surrounded by cameras and reporters and all the pomp that comes with a billion-dollar IPO, I found myself thinking not about stock prices or market valuations, but about a 19-year-old girl in Miami who'd felt scared and alone, and convinced that her pregnancy was the end of her dreams. The ceremony was everything I'd imagined it would be, the culmination of 15 years of work, the validation of every risk James and I had taken, the proof that technology could be both profitable and purposeful. But as I posed for photos and answered questions from financial journalists, I kept thinking about my mother's words from that phone call. "You became exactly the kind of person I needed when I was young and scared." That's when I knew what my gift to her needed to be. After the trading day ended, and Empathy AI stock had closed up 85% from its opening price, I called an emergency meeting with our foundation board. Empathy AI had established a charitable foundation the previous year, focused on funding mental health research and support programs in underserved communities. But what I was proposing would be our largest initiative yet. I want to build a comprehensive support center for single mothers, I announced to the room full of board members and foundation executives. Not just a shelter or a counseling center, but a full-service facility that provides everything a young mother might need: housing assistance, job training, childcare, mental health support, educational opportunities, financial planning. I want to create the support system that didn't exist for women like my mother 30 years ago. The room was quiet for a moment. Finally, Dr. Patricia Williams, who had remained an investor and advisor as Empathy AI grew, leaned forward. "This is personal for you," she said. It wasn't a question. Yes, but it's also strategic. We have data showing that early intervention and comprehensive support can completely change the trajectory for single mothers and their children. This isn't just charity, it's preventive medicine, preventive social work, preventive education. If we can help one generation of mothers build stable, healthy lives, we prevent decades of problems for their children. James was nodding enthusiastically. "Where would you build it?" I'd already thought about that too. Miami. Specifically, in the neighborhood where I grew up. But here's the thing. I don't want this to be the Clara Parker Center or the Empathy AI Foundation building. I want to name it after someone who represents the journey from struggle to strength, someone who embodies the truth that our worst moments don't have to define our entire story. I paused, looking around the room at the faces of people who'd become my chosen family over the past 5 years. I want to call it the Clara Parker Center for New Mothers. The board approved the proposal unanimously. Over the next 6 months, we purchased a full city block in Little Havana, just 12 blocks from the apartment where I'd grown up. The architectural plans called for a beautiful, modern facility that would include temporary housing for up to 50 mothers and their children, a full-service health clinic, childcare facilities, job training centers, educational programs, and a technology lab where mothers could learn digital skills that would help them build careers in the modern economy. But the real innovation was in the program design. Using modified versions of the AI systems we developed for Empathy AI, we created a comprehensive assessment and matching program that would help each mother identify her specific challenges and connect her with customized resources and support systems. No two mothers would have identical experiences at the Clara Parker Center because no two mothers faced identical challenges. The construction took 18 months. During that time, I flew to Miami once a month to check on progress and work with local community leaders to ensure that the center would truly serve the neighborhood's needs. I also used these trips to have lunch with my mother to continue the slow work of rebuilding our relationship on a foundation of honesty and mutual respect. She knew about the center, of course. It was hard to keep a $50 million construction project secret in a neighborhood where everyone knew everyone else's business. But she didn't know about the name until the day before the dedication ceremony. "I need to tell you something," I said as we sat in a small Cuban cafe near her apartment. She was 67 now, and the years of cigarettes and stress had left their mark, but there was something lighter about her than there had been during my childhood. The conversation we'd had a year and a half earlier had changed something fundamental between us. "What's that, baby girl?" "The center I've been building. The one that's opening tomorrow. I named it after you." She set down her cafe cortadito with shaking hands. "What do you mean?" "It's called the Clara Parker Center for New Mothers. There's going to be a plaque by the front entrance that tells your story, how you became a mother at 19, how you worked multiple jobs to support your daughter, how you sacrificed your own dreams to make sure she had opportunities you never had. It talks about how love sometimes looks like struggle, and how the strongest mothers are often the ones who feel like they're barely holding it together." Tears were streaming down her face now. "Elizabeth, I don't deserve." "Yes, you do. You deserve to have your struggles honored instead of hidden. You deserve to have your story inspire other women instead of being something you're ashamed of. You deserve to see that the hardest chapters of your life weren't wasted. They were preparation for something meaningful." The dedication ceremony was held on a clear Saturday morning in October. The entire neighborhood turned out, along with local politicians, community leaders, and a collection of Empathy AI employees who'd flown in from San Francisco. But the most important person in the crowd was my mother, sitting in the front row wearing a new dress we'd picked out together the day before. When it came time for my speech, I walked to the podium and looked out at the assembled crowd. In the distance, I could see the apartment building where I'd grown up, where a 7-year-old girl had once promised herself that she would prove she wasn't a mistake. 30 years ago, I began. A 19-year-old woman named Clara Parker found herself pregnant, alone, and convinced that her life was over. She was wrong about that last part, but she couldn't have known it at the time. What she did know was that she was going to fight for her daughter's future, even when she couldn't see her own. I looked directly at my mother as I continued. Clara worked double shifts at a diner, skipped meals to make sure her daughter had school supplies, and carried the weight of 100 small sacrifices that no one else would ever see. She wasn't perfect, none of us are, but she was strong enough to raise a daughter who would grow up to build a company dedicated to helping other people find hope in their darkest moments. The crowd was silent, hanging on every word. The Clara Parker Center for New Mothers exists because one woman's struggles taught her daughter that pain can be transformed into purpose, that mistakes can become miracles, and that the most powerful force in the universe is a mother's love, even when that love comes wrapped in sacrifice instead of sentiment. I paused, meeting my mother's eyes across the crowd. "Mom, this is for you. Not because you were perfect, but because you were human. Not because you always knew the right thing to say, but because you always found a way to keep going. This center will help thousands of women over the coming decades, and every single one of them will benefit from the lessons I learned watching you refuse to give up." As the applause filled the air and the ribbon was cut, I watched my mother cry. Not the tears of shame and regret that had marked so much of our relationship, but tears of recognition and redemption. She was seeing, perhaps for the first time, that her struggles had meaning, that her sacrifices had purpose, that the girl she called a mistake had become someone capable of transforming pain into hope for countless others. After the ceremony, as the crowd dispersed and the television crews packed up their equipment, my mother and I stood together in front of the bronze plaque that bore her name and told her story. "I don't understand," she said quietly. "After everything I said to you, everything I put you through, why would you do this?" I took her hand, something I couldn't remember doing since I was very small. "Because you taught me the most important lesson of my life, Mom. You taught me that love isn't always pretty or easy or comfortable. Sometimes love looks like working 2 jobs to pay the rent. Sometimes love looks like making sure your daughter knows she's capable of more than you ever dreamed possible. And sometimes love looks like giving someone a gift that shows them their story isn't over, it's just beginning." We stood there together as the Miami sun set behind the building that would serve as a monument to the truth that our worst moments don't have to define us. The Clara Parker Center for New Mothers would open its doors the following Monday, welcoming its first residents, young women who, like my mother 30 years before, needed someone to remind them that they were stronger than their circumstances. But the real gift wasn't the building or the programs, or even the recognition. The real gift was the conversation we had as we walked back to her apartment that evening, when she told me about her dreams of becoming a nurse, and I told her about the scholarship program we were launching for mothers who wanted to complete their education. "It's never too late to finish what you started, Mom," I said as we reached her building. She smiled, a real smile, free of the bitterness and regret that had shadowed our relationship for so long. "Maybe you're right, baby girl. Maybe it's never too late to start over." As I flew back to San Francisco the next morning, I thought about the journey that had brought me to this moment. I'd spent 30 years trying to prove I wasn't a mistake, only to discover that the real gift wasn't proving anything to anyone else. It was learning to transform pain into purpose, resentment into redemption, and the deepest wounds into the foundation for helping others heal. The girl who'd once stood in a cramped Miami kitchen, holding a report card and desperately seeking approval, had grown into a woman capable of building monuments to the truth that love sometimes comes wrapped in struggle, that families can be rebuilt on foundations of forgiveness, and that the most powerful gifts are the ones that help people rewrite the stories they tell themselves about who they are and what they're capable of becoming. My mother was right about one thing. I had become exactly the kind of person she'd needed when she was young and scared. But what she hadn't realized until now was that she had become exactly the kind of mother who could raise someone capable of that kind of empathy and strength. Some gifts come wrapped in ribbons and bows. Others come wrapped in truth, growth, and the quiet recognition that our struggles are not mistakes to be hidden, but stories to be honored. The Clara Parker Center would help thousands of mothers over the coming years, but its first and most important gift was the one it gave to the woman whose name it bore, the knowledge that her story mattered, her sacrifices had meaning, and the daughter she'd once called a mistake had become living proof that love can transform anything, even pain, into something beautiful. 5 years later, I stood once again at a podium, this time at the annual conference of the National Association of Community Health Centers. The Clara Parker Center had become a model replicated in 12 cities across the United States, and our programs had helped over 8,000 mothers build stable, independent lives for themselves and their children. But today's speech wasn't about statistics or program outcomes. It was about something more fundamental, the power of changing the stories we tell ourselves about our past. My mother used to tell me I was a mistake. I began, looking out at an audience of healthcare workers, social workers, and community leaders. For 30 years, I believed her. But what I've learned is that there are no mistakes, only opportunities to discover what we're truly capable of when we stop letting other people's limitations define our possibilities. In the front row, Clara Parker, now a licensed practical nurse who worked part-time at the center that bore her name, smiled up at me with pride. At 72, she finally finished the education she'd started at 19, proving that some dreams are worth waiting for. The Clara Parker Centers exist because we believe that everyone deserves a chance to rewrite their story, I continued. They exist because we've learned that the most powerful gift you can give someone isn't money or resources or even opportunity. It's the chance to see themselves as the hero of their own story instead of the victim of someone else's. After my speech, as my mother and I walked through the gardens of the original Miami Center, I reflected on how far we both traveled from that cramped kitchen in Little Havana. I'm proud of you, Elizabeth, she said, using words that had taken her 7 decades to learn how to say. I'm proud of us, Mom, I replied. I'm proud of what we built together, even when we didn't know that's what we were doing. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the playground where children of the center's residents were playing, children who would grow up knowing they were wanted, valued, and capable of anything they could dream. Their mothers watched from nearby benches, many of them working on laptops provided by the center's technology program, building the skills that would help them create the futures they'd once thought were impossible. This was my mother's legacy as much as mine, a place where mistakes became miracles, where pain was transformed into purpose, and where every day someone discovered that they were capable of rewriting their story. The girl my mother once called a mistake had given her the greatest gift of all, the chance to see that there are no mistakes, only opportunities to discover what love looks like when it's finally allowed to bloom. If you liked this story, leave your opinion in the comments and, of course, leave a like and subscribe. Turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any videos. Big hug and see you soon.